Good morning, everybody. Coming at you live, recording from Mr. Chris's office in Mr. Chris's house. We are recording our section 3 notes for chapter 17, The West Between the Wars, for world history class. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we do that, we're going to get to our opening question today. Again, if you're watching this or listening to this on Tuesday or Thursday, make sure to sign in on your Google Forms. Couple things just to go back here, your little checklist, to-do list as you're kind of getting started this week. Again, if you didn't get done with the World Wars episode, I encourage you to do that. Turn those in. You had your section 1 notes, your section 2 notes, our ed puzzle for Crash Course. We had our FlowCab assignment that was along with our section 2 notes. Still have a few people that haven't turned that in. If you are one of these people, please make sure you're doing that, okay? Again, I appreciate everybody's patience and everybody's ability to stick with it right now. I am recording this. It's like 60 degrees outside. The sun is shining. All I want to do is be outside, do something fun. But, here we are. We got to get through it and grind together, okay? Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to keep this like one of my favorite movies, 30 minutes or less. It's a great film about the pizza bomber in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. You didn't think you were going to get that tidbit today, but now you did. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Your notes that are going to be posted are going to be on Google Doc form again for section 3. So make sure you're watching this, reading these, filling everything in as you need, and you guys are good to go. Quick, very exciting tidbit before we get to our opening question. We will not be having a final exam for this class this year. I will allow 5 seconds for applauding and cheering. Oh, yeah. Woo! Okay. So with that being said, I ask that you guys still take this seriously, still kind of to do what you can to get things done. You are still being graded on things. I'm being asked to give out assignments and assessments, and we're going to grade like we usually would. It's just that we will not have a culminating final exam. Okay? If you have questions about that or you're worried about something, please email me or let me know, and I'll answer it for you. All right, after the third attempt of saying let's get started, now let's get started with the opening question today. These defined what it was to be considered a Jew. They excluded Jews from German citizenship, and they also stripped Jews of their civil rights. Dramatic pause, dramatic pause. These things were known as Nuremberg laws, or the Nuremberg laws. This is going to be something implemented by the fascist ruler, the Nazis, and Adolf Hitler during their time in Germany in order to kind of figure out, according to their own system and their own regulations, what does and doesn't make an Aryan or a German person. As we know that Hitler's going to be trying to create what he believes to be this master race, and he wants to exclude certain people, specifically finding ways to exclude the Jews. Now, we're going to talk more about that in this lesson today. In our next lesson, that relationship and the dynamic of the Holocaust and Hitler and the Nazis and the Jews. You're also going to see it in your episode of the World Wars, so keep an eye out for that. Our schedule for Monday and Tuesday, April 20th and April 21st. There's our opening question. I will post an episode of CNN 10 for you guys. Remember, your current events are up there. They are due not this Friday, but next Friday. That's May 1st. So if you want to get that done early so you don't have to worry about it, that's a great idea. I'm also posting episode 4 of Some Good News by John Krasinski. It's another good one. They get me every time. I don't know if you guys like them, enjoy them, or even spending the time to look at them, but for those of you who are, I hope it's something good, something to kind of dwell on to keep spirits high here while we're all still stuck inside. We'll get through our notes. And then just a quick heads up here, another official announcement. Chapter 17 vocab terms that are on Quizlet. Not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday, we will take our vocab quiz. We will do that on Quizlet.com. I will have my Securely up to make sure we have the appropriate amount of tabs and screens going. So just be aware and be preparing for that. All right? Let's go ahead and get started on section 3, specifically coming in on Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. A little bit of background here, speaking about Adolf Hitler and his views, how we go from this kind of everyday average person to these very radical ways of thinking. Adolf Hitler developed his basic ideas while in art school in Vienna. Now, there's a ton of rumors and theories, and I mean, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books and novels and hours of research done trying to figure out Hitler's thinking. No one knows that 100% for sure, but a lot of the theories stem from things that happened early in his life, whether it be in his childhood, whether it be in primary school or in art school here in Vienna, or his experiences in World War One. Quite frankly, though, at the core of Hitler's idea was essentially just racism, and not just specifically racism toward or broad racism, I should say, to a lot of people, but specifically anti-Semitism, which we know as hostility or racism toward people of Jewish descent. Okay. We're going to spend more time later in the week getting into kind of some theories on where that came from, why he feels that way, and then we obviously are going to see that it dictates a lot of his behavior moving forward. This here is actually a photograph that Adolf Hitler, if you can see a young Hitler here, is featured in at Vienna, at the art school he was in Vienna, I should say. And this is one of Adolf Hitler's paintings from when he was in art school, which is things you can Google and find. Pretty much just type in Adolf Hitler artwork, and you can find a lot of it. A quote here, later on after Hitler rises to power in the late 1930s, we shall only talk of peace when we have won the war. The Jewish capitalist world will not survive the 20th century. There's a great deal of him trying to push and portray, again, someone who is anti capitalism, somebody who is anti a lot of the freedoms and ways of American society, and the rise in fame and prominence that many Jewish Americans have come to know. So Hitler's going to, we're going to get more into the background of what his agenda was with people of Jewish descent. Today, it's going to be more of a broad strokes of how did this guy get into power in the first place, and how do we even end up with a guy like Hitler in charge of this entire country and in charge with this new regime of fascism. Continuing his views. By 1921, so not long after World War I, Hitler took control of a right-wing extreme nationalist party, which will later end up being called, like in a short version, the Nazis. It's also renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, but that's a mouthful, hence why we end up calling them the Nazis. If you guys did watch your World Wars episode, Trial by Fire, at the very end there, you would have seen what we talked about, how he took his experiences from World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, that shame that he was so upset with, and how Germany was treated and how it wasn't fair, and how the Weimar Republic and democracy were letting them down. He is jailed after an attack, as you guys again saw at the end of that episode. While in jail in 1923, he writes this book over here on the right, which is called Mein Kampf, which I'm sure you've heard of, maybe seen, maybe even seen or read excerpts of. And Mein Kampf translates loosely to My Struggle, and talking a lot about the blaming of these different nations, democracy, freedom, these capitalist societies, the Jews, the Gypsies, a lot of other groups of people, and kind of their roles and how they were intricate in the fall of Germany, and pushing a lot of that blame on these other peoples and other groups. The rise of Nazism. By 1932, the Nazis had become the largest party in the German Reichstag. I'm not going to ask you guys to be able to pronounce and remember all these awesome German names for things. It's not quite der Schlieffenplan, which you haven't thought of in a long time. But the Reichstag is another word for the German parliament. Again, without getting too into the weeds here and diving too far into this, Germany after World War I has a democracy put in place, that Weimar Republic. That is who, and then we have an actual president that's put in place in Germany. There are still other political parties, and the Nazis, when they start off, and again, when we get to our next episode of the World Wars, you're going to see they start off as a very small political party. And they have some ideas. They aren't quite as radical as we're eventually going to get to. At least they don't start off that way, and they kind of get people on their side. The way they get people on their side, Hitler appeals to two things: nationalism, so stating that Germany is the most important thing. We need to get back to being a first world country. We need to grow. We need to become strong. We need to get back to our rightful place in the world. And militarism. He is a huge believer in we need to create a strong army. We need to create a strong defense system in order to basically kind of bully around these other countries that have told us what we are and aren't allowed to do. And think about it again, during this time in Germany, a lot of people are unemployed. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people have no food, have no income, have nothing. The idea of nationalism, Germany coming back using their military to become strong again, appealed to a lot of people. Again, I ask you to read this second bullet. Do we see anything in here about conquering the world? Do we see anything in here about exterminating a group of people? Do we see anything about mass genocide or murder? No. All you're seeing is, hey, we want Germany to become strong and we want to use our military. That's a message that a lot of countries right now believe in themselves. In 2020, they want to become a strong, powerful nation, and some want to use their military to do so. He also preyed on people's fears down at the bottom here. Unemployment had risen dramatically, growing from nearly 4.5 million people to over 5.5 million by 1932. Germany is drowning, and they need someone to drag them out. Hitler and the Nazis will be these people that a lot of people turn to. Little chart there again, as you can see, just how quickly and abruptly over from the early 1920s, pardon me, up to 1932, this has gotten out of control. These are numbers in the millions of people that are unemployed and out of work and have nowhere to turn. So we can see, again, that's over a decade. Imagine like what we're going through right now, a lot worse version of what we're going through right now, and then lasting for around 10 years. So you can see people are going to become very desperate. And in our next episode, like I said, I'm going to plug the World Wars about 50 times during this slide today because it's awesome. And I think it's going to show you in real time how not only people in Germany, people in Europe, but people around the world were kind of fooled by Hitler's tactics and how he was able to rise to power. The Nazis take control. The right-wing elites of Germany begin to look to Hitler for leadership. They see this guy in charge of this small party, and it's growing and growing and growing. He gives these powerful and emotional speeches. He talks about nationalism. He talks about bringing Germany back to the forefront, and people are listening to him. People are like, they can't get enough of him with, I love this idea of us getting back to being on top. So a combination of industrial leaders, aristocrats, military officers, bureaucrats, so people in office, people holding positions of power are looking at Hitler and saying, you know, this guy's saying he can get us back to the top. He can bring us there. If we follow him, he will bring us kind of back to glory. They fall so much into his trap and his speeches and the way he speaks and the words he's writing down that they actually give him kind of this loose position in their government. They look at this. I'm going to use this word a lot coming up in the next couple of weeks of appeasement. They want to give him a position in their government, believing, hey, this guy clearly wants power. He wants something to be in charge of. Let's give him a job. Let's put him in a position where he has a little bit of power, and that will appease him. Think of it this way, guys. Does anyone have little brothers or sisters, maybe baby brothers or sisters? If a little kid is crying and crying and crying and crying, a lot of times you'll see you, mom or dad, somebody, give them a binky, give them a pacifier, give them a treat, give them something. And it's the idea of to pacify, to appease them. If they get that one little thing, they'll stop crying. They'll stop arguing. The idea with these right-wing people in Germany is, well, let's give him a job and he'll kind of stop trying to take over and get all the way to the top. He'll stop trying to become this ruler of everybody. He'll have a little bit of power and he'll be happy with that. They give him this little bit of power, and then within that, Hitler puts into place this thing called the Enabling Act. By the end of using the Enabling Act, he's able to put in, essentially that is laws that gave the government the power to ignore the Constitution for a 4-year period in order to get them out of the Great Depression. So while issuing laws to deal with the country's problems, Hitler was allowed to put all these things in place that would eventually come back to down the road, helping him gain more and more power. And again, that Enabling Act, we'll talk more about that later in the week as well. But it leads to Hitler eventually going from becoming kind of this low-level person in the government. He is granted the position of chancellor, which is kind of more of a title rather than actual any power. But by the time he's in a position to have the chancellorship, this is what he's going to use to put in the Enabling Act and then eventually become the one and only dictator ruler of Parliament. And again, you can see some of those bills in the Enabling Act over here that are passed. This is an actual newspaper clip, Friday, March 24th, 1933. Once Hitler becomes somewhere between the chancellor and the dictator, he actually eliminates the position of president in the government and makes it so after their president passes away, he makes it so there will be no more election. And again, at this time, he's becoming more and more and more popular. Germany is slowly kind of on the uptick, getting themselves out of the Great Depression, and they credit that all to Hitler. Continuing with the Nazis take control, Hitler's eventual goal, and this is not something he's stating on the outside, it's not something he's stating super publicly at first, but he will start to loosen up and kind of spread his ideology and thinking as he gains more and more power. His goal was to develop what he called an Aryan racial state that would dominate the world. So, little confusing thing here. To literally Google, like, what does Aryan mean? I've heard that word before. People toss it around all the time. What does that mean? The literal term Aryan is used to identify people speaking Indo-European languages. So that area of kind of mostly like Eastern European nations and places. The Nazis take this term and kind of make it their own thing. The Nazis misuse the term by treating it as a racial designation. They use it to identify the Aryan people, quote unquote, as anybody who has ancestry back to the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and 20th century Germans, Scandinavians. So that's people living in from 1900 to 99 in the area of like where we see like the German Empire and Scandinavia being like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. A lot of times what his Aryan race would mean is, and you guys have probably seen or heard this before, the very prominent facial features, the blonde hair, the blue eyes, in really good shape, in very good health. And he believed that he could literally create this kind of perfect society of people. Hitler, his party, and the Nazis thought the Germans would create an empire not unlike the Roman Empire that existed generations before them. He was a firm believer that not only would he eventually go on to create an empire, but that there had already seen two German empires, or Reichs as they were called. The first being the Holy Roman Empire, the second one being the German Empire of the 1870s, which eventually lost in World War I. So what Hitler is, you're going to see and read about and watch a little bit of, is kind of create this thing called the Third Reich, which essentially is the third empire that will conquer and be in charge of most of the civilized world. I know you're all dying for me to try to pronounce this word, and I am not going to do it because I don't know enough German. So someone who knows German, just said it out loud as you're rolling your eyes at me. That's okay. But this word right here, aka the Guard Squadrons, this group was simply known as the SS in Nazi Germany, or to most of the rest of the world. And they were a very important force as far as maintaining order. Hitler knew he couldn't just say all these ideas and go out and say, well, I'm going to have this, I want to do that, put me in charge, and we're going to get it done. He needed his SS soldiers to be able to not only protect him, they start off as kind of these Secret Service bodyguard type people, but eventually the SS grows and grows and grows into soldiers. Under the direction of a guy named Heinrich Himmler, the SS came to control not only the secret police in Germany and in Europe, but also the regular police as well. And basically control and enforce what laws they do and don't believe to be important. Heinrich Himmler is pictured right here at the very top. This is a very famous photo of Himmler in walking along concentration camps, the very early stages of concentration camps, when people who maybe disobeyed or were arrested for trying to stand up to the SS. And you've probably seen the uniformed versions of these secret police before, also known as in parts as the Gestapo, that worked for Adolf Hitler. And this is obviously once they start to grow and grow and grow. This is eventually going to lead to what we get known as, again, I couldn't get out of here without a Star Wars reference today. We talk about stormtroopers. For all my Star Wars fans out there, you think of stormtroopers, you're thinking about the guys on the right. And again, my Star Wars connection to world history maintains. These are kind of the henchmen, the soldiers that go out and do all the dirty work. They kind of follow their leader blindly and do what's asked of them. Not a lot of stormtroopers standing up and doing what they believe is right or opposing their leaders. This comes from what we knew from World War II and the Nazis being called stormtroopers. They worked for Hitler. They did what he asked them to do. There were consequences that were put in place. If you were to doubt Hitler, if you were to doubt the Nazis, if you were to stand up against them, you could be executed, you could be killed, you could be put in a concentration camp. Things could happen to your family. So the stormtrooper connection kind of lives on. Just to go back real quick, not to mention naming these guys stormtroopers and casting them in a movie in the 70s and 80s, it pretty much makes that direct connection back to guys that we consider to be bad or evil. That connection is pretty obvious then. All right, a few more here. Economics and spectacles. Hitler used what he called his public works programs and private grants to put people back to work and end the Depression. He would put these giant bases and have people building tanks, building planes, building guns, building whatever it may be in these kind of secret parts of Germany, even though he wasn't supposed to be doing that, according to the Treaty of Versailles. But this was a way of putting mass production out there. You needed workers. You needed people to be in the factories. You needed people working on assembly lines. This helped stimulate Germany's economy greatly. He also put together what he called a massive rearmament program to rearm Germany. And these things were the key to solving unemployment in the Great Depression. So again, he puts people in factories to make uniforms, to make helmets, to make boots, to make different types of weapons. The Nazis and Hitler are going to go on to help reinvent warfare. And a lot of these very different radicalized weapons that are going to be used in World War II come from these public works programs. Unemployment, which had reached, like we said, around 5 million in 1932, dropped in half in 1934. And by the time we get to Hitler being in real position of power in 1937, it's less than 500,000 people are unemployed. So again, by this point in 1937, do we see camps? Do we see death? Do we see murder in the streets? No. All we see is people that were unemployed having jobs, and then more people that were unemployed having jobs. We see a country growing and putting on the rise. So the regime, the Nazis, claim credit for this. Hey, you put us in power and look at us now. We're making money. We're building things. We're becoming more and more powerful. And this is, again, one of the reasons that a lot of citizens and people in Germany looked at Hitler and the Nazis and not only accepted them, but cheered them, loved them, thought these are the people bringing us back to our rightful place in Europe as one of the powerful nations there. And I didn't kind of show you this earlier, but we can see our bell curve. Unemployment gets out of control up into 1932. Hitler and the Nazis take power, and that number decreases greatly to the fact where unemployment is almost gone by 1938, 1939. Just a little bit of a background photo there of some of the rearmament facilities. As you can see, we're building planes up here with attaching, making them faster, making them smarter, attaching different kinds of weapons and bombing abilities to them. Tanks down here below as well. Okay, so now we're going to get into kind of some of the ideas and theories of like the other people's roles in Nazi Germany. We see a lot of the soldiers, the SS, the Nazis, what they're up to, women in Nazism, and then anti-Semitic problems. In a few quick sentences here, we're not going to spend a ton of time in this class, but again, these are like college courses where you can spend 18 weeks learning about the Nazis, learning about World War II. Women during this time in Nazi Germany played a huge role, a very important role. Now, that's kind of up to you to decide whether you think that or not. But Hitler could not have put more of an emphasis on why women were so important. And they were important because they were the bearers of the Aryan children that he wanted. These were the women who were going to help create and push forward the next generation of the Nazis, of this Aryan race, and of the Third Reich. Using propaganda, using ways to kind of manipulate and tell people, Hitler encouraged women to take on roles in nursing, in like elementary and preschool education, basically in jobs that would put them around children as much as possible and kind of get women used to and normalized with the role of that's what they were meant to do. That's where their value was teaching children at young ages what they were supposed to do in the Nazi world. As we all know, once in power, the Nazis translated anti-Semitic ideas into anti-Semitic policies. Very quickly after Hitler's now popularized, he's rallied most of Germany behind him. He can take his beliefs and what he thinks should be happening, and now, regardless of what people think and feel, he can kind of slowly put them into place as laws. New racial laws were enacted in September of 1935. And again, I will say this is via propaganda. There's no internet, there's no newspapers, there's no television. First of all, there's no internet and TV, period. There's no newspapers or no information being spread that isn't being passed through Hitler and the Nazis first. They will decide what people read and think and feel. And he convinces a lot of people that the Jews were responsible for kind of not supporting Germany during World War I. That the Jews that lived in Austria, in Poland, in Germany were responsible for giving up during World War I. Were responsible for a lot of other socioeconomic problems. And he convinces these people in Germany now, since he's been in power, I haven't given these people any say, I haven't given these people any power, and look what's happened in Germany. We've become more and more powerful. Just going back here, here's a little bit of the propaganda, some paintings, some newspaper ads you would see with women trying to convince them of their role as the family. You can see the fascist symbol in the back here. And you can even see the Heil of Hitler here of this little family. And again, this is where it became more and more common for women to have children, have families, I should say, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. The more children we can have, the more powerful we can become. Continuing on those anti-Semitic policies, like we mentioned earlier, the Nuremberg laws excluded Jews from German citizenship. The Nuremberg laws are put in place, which is it's a kind of the very first step in how this is going to be figured out and taking place. It's going to, essentially, it's a way of like segregating. It's a way of stating, if you're allowing these people into your shops, into your homes, into your wherever, you're essentially saying you don't care about Germany. You don't care about our nation. You don't care about us getting back to the top. And it encouraged people to discriminate against the Jews on their own. The next step in these policies were required Jews to quite literally wear their Judaism on their shirts. They had to wear Stars of David. They also had to carry around paperwork and ID cards saying that they were in fact Jewish. And these Nuremberg laws are going to go back and essentially use your family history to prove in any way, shape, or form. If you had a grandfather, a great-grandfather, anyone in your family tree that had Jewish blood or Jewish descent, you yourself would be considered Jewish, even if it was your great-great-grandmother and she was half Jewish, per se. That would still count in Hitler's Nazi world. This all culminates in an event called Kristallnacht, or Night of the Shattered Glass, in November 9th, 1938. It was a destructive rampage against the Jews. It was started very quietly by the Nazis. And again, this was, in a way of using propaganda, it was essentially saying that the Jews had been violent and stood up for themselves and caused this kind of riot, panic, fear against the Nazis, and mobilized and enabled people to go down to this area where a lot of Jews lived in Nazi Germany, break windows, destroy shops, destroy homes, set buildings and things on fire. And it encouraged this, again, like violent racial profiling. So as you guys can see here is a photo of some of the stars that these people had to wear on their coats, on their shirts, to prove that they were Jewish. And here's their identification with the star symbol on there as well, and stating, where they come from, where they live, who their family members are, so on and so forth. Here are some photos from the night of the Shattered Glass, or Kristallnacht, where you can see a lot of these shops and homes and this is actually a synagogue here, a place where Jewish people go to worship, that were set on fire and destroyed, or they were at least tagged for future reference. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Your notes are going to be posted along with this. I'm going to make sure to tag you guys, and not tag, what am I talking about? I'm going to make sure to post this with you all at once so you guys have that. You can fill those in as you're going. Be on the lookout for your next episode of the World Wars. It is part 2 in the documentary series. There's only 3 parts total. This, I think, is going to be the most interesting, fascinating, important part of the miniseries, and it's going to do a much more thorough job of taking us through what happened in the 1930s in Germany and kind of how the treatment of Jews, the treatment of homosexuals, gypsies, African Americans, anybody who was not fitting into that box of the Aryan race were ID'd. So that's it for your lesson today. Your Quizlet terms, again, don't forget about Modern World History, Chapter 17. Your quiz is going to be next week. If you guys have any questions, comments, complaints, grudges, grievances, random relevant remarks, please let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys later this week. All right. See you.